Well, hello everyone, and this is take two, and welcome to Critical Wave Theory. So I did start recording this earlier, but you know what? I was like, I'm going to take a shower first, freshen up, and I'll probably speak better as a result. And sure enough, I think I'm refreshed and ready to get into these movies here to talk about five classic alien movies. And of course, these are sci fi classics and they have different representations of aliens. And it's really a journey through cinema, looking at five massive films between 1968 and 1979 that completely redefined sci fi and horror with memorable aliens involved. So we're cutting right to the core of what made these movies work. It's not so much a review that much, I'm just talking about why people like these movies and respect them. I'm going to look a little bit at the casts here and there and see how they brought the worlds to life. So let's get into it. I could talk about each one of these movies for an hour, but I've really condensed things down in my notes so I don't get too sidetracked. So let's look at the first selection. It's 2001 A Space Odyssey from 1968. Now, I would be lying if I said this was my favorite movie or even that I love this movie or anything like that. It's not my fave, all right? But people consider it a classic, and I have seen it, so I was like, you know what? I'm going to rewatch this sucker and I'm going to talk about it a little bit here. So, this is Stanley Kubrick's movie that is often considered a masterpiece. Some people will say it's his best movie, and it was co written with Arthur C. Clarke. So, 2001 traces human evolution from early hominids who discovered tools, and we eventually end up getting to a spacefaring future, all nudged along by a mysterious black monolith, which is really this movie's representation of aliens, some sort of weird alien technology. Now, could I explain what the monolith is? No. You tell me. You tell me what it represents. This is one of those movies that, like a lot of people, I just don't totally get it. I don't know if it's something that's meant to be gotten exactly. I think it's intentionally mysterious. But maybe I'm just being dumb. I don't know. You could explain it to me like I'm five. All right. So if you want to get my attention in the comments about this movie, go ahead and spill your guts out. Let me know what you think this movie is about, because it's definitely confusing. I do like the ape scene in the beginning. Um, Frankly, I almost think they should have stuck with that, to be honest. Um, that's probably not the best sort of thing to say. I'm sure I'll take some heat, but that's just my opinion. I think the human heart of the film rests on the Dr. Dave Bowman character, and you also have Dr. Frank Poole. They give these professional performances, and that's another like critique I kind of have to get in here. Like, I don't think there are that many memorable performances in this movie, to be honest. It's more about the imagery, the cinematography, and I guess the mysterious concept. And there's the isolation of deep space, and of course, there's a standout star of this movie, Douglas Rain, who provided the hauntingly calm and polite voice for the AI computer named HAL 9000. It's, he's got an increasingly dangerous malfunction, and it's sort of unsettling because the AI thing is so calm about it. And, the storyline there kind of reminds us of today with all these fears of AI and the idea of technology just getting out of hand, getting out of control, and ultimately screwing human beings over one way or the other. And this was a representation of that idea back in 1968. So to me, that is one of the sort of innovative things that this movie does. Just it doesn't look at technology unflinchingly, and it questions the future, I suppose, like the bold visions that we have about it. It's like sort of urging us to reassess the situation. At least that's my take on it. Now, Kubrick traded typical cinematic noise for some quiet and vast space, and he's relying on sparse dialogue and some iconic music. And while some find this movie's pace deliberate and actually frustrating because it really does take its time, it still remains a landmark exploration of AI, human limitation, and the unknown. And of course, there are some classic images in this movie. So that's one thing that just cannot not be denied. Denied? I just said denied instead of denied. Anyway, that cannot be denied about 2001: A Space Odyssey. It has some iconic images. And that really is one of my takeaways from this movie, as well as, like I said, the themes of man versus machine. And I think that scene in the beginning, if they would have done something more with that, I think it could have been interesting. Actually, I don't know. It could have been maybe like a Planet of the Apes sort of movie or something. Anyway, like I said, feel free to explain to me your take on this movie, and maybe you can get my idiot brain to understand and appreciate it a little bit better. All right, for the second selection, we have Star Wars, which was kind of renamed as Star Wars Episode IV: A New Hope. And this came out, of course, in 1977, so I was not even born yet when these first two movies came out. So in 1977, George Lucas permanently reshaped modern pop culture. He blended mythology, westerns, and Akira Kurosawa's samurai cinema into a fast moving, accessible space fantasy. Now, the film succeeded largely because of the instant chemistry among its young, then lesser known leads. You had Mark Hamill as the idealistic farm boy, Luke Skywalker, Harrison Ford as the cynical smuggler, Han Solo, and Carrie Fisher as the fierce, defiant Princess Leia. And of course, there are plenty of other actors, on the good guys side that I could get into. But you could always look those up on IMDb or Wikipedia. I think the fact is that those three characters are just iconic. Everybody has heard about them. You've heard about Han Solo. You've heard about Luke Skywalker. I almost said Skywalker. Skywalker. And you've of course heard of Princess Leia as well. So and Chewbacca, who hasn't heard of Chewbacca, C3PO, lots of names like that. Yoda actually is not in this one, so you have to wait for a future installment to see Yoda. So that might disappoint people who are first wanting to get into the Star Wars films and they watch them in order and they've heard of Yoda and they've seen, you know, the image of Yoda. Maybe they've heard his voice somewhere, but he's not in this one. So that's a little bit of a warning for you people. He's not here. He's not home in this movie. Um, anyway, they were perfectly balanced by veteran actors Alec Guinness. I almost said Alex. Jesus Christ. But anyway, Alec Guinness, he brought gravitas to the aging Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you had Peter Cushing as the cold Grand Moff Tarkin, and of course the imposing villain Darth Vader. Now, Darth Vader was a dual effort, physically played by towering bodybuilder David Prowse and voiced with unforgettable menace by James Earl Jones. And this movie is backed by John Williams' legendary orchestral score. I did a whole episode on John Williams. You should check that out if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on him. It's one of those episodes where I ended up feeling like, am I praising him too much? Like, it sounds like I'm treating him almost like he's a god like figure. You know, I I don't want to revere somebody too much to the point where it sounds like I would drink Kool-Aid for them in a cult. But nevertheless, John Williams, he truly is one of the greats when it comes to scoring movies, and this is of course one of his all-time classics that he came up with music for. And the film overcame a difficult production to win 7 Oscars and became a box office phenomenon, establishing the modern blockbuster merchandising model that we know today. And you know, there's some good things about that and some bad things. And of course, this movie has plenty of memorable alien moments. You know, just have your pick. You know, they're all over the place in this movie and within the Star Wars franchise. So up next, we've got a different kind of alien. Our third selection is Superman from 1978. Before Richard Donner's Superman, comic book adaptations were largely treated as these campy diversions. And sure, you might still be able to say that about them if that's your attitude, but this movie, it made it a little bit more respectable, the superhero genre. And Donner insisted on verisimilitude, treating the character with complete sincerity. The famous tagline, "You'll believe a man can fly," was backed by groundbreaking visual effects that truly convinced audiences back in 1978. Well, okay, there probably weren't that many people who genuinely believed that, Superman was actually a real thing and that he was flying. But you know what I mean? It just looked pretty good, especially for the time. And it was back in 1978. Obviously, movie effects, they still had to be perfected. And frankly, we're still not at a place where they're perfect. Even today, you can still pick out bad effects even in movies that have good effects. So we're possibly never going to totally get there when it comes to being convincing, although definitely some movies get pretty close. Jurassic Park gave us some shockingly realistic looking dinosaurs, and the flight of Superman in this film, it's it's pretty well done. It really is. It still holds up pretty well today. So Christopher Reeve completely defined the lead role, delivering a legendary performance that contrasted a confident, compassionate Superman with a genuinely awkward, bumbling Clark Kent, using these subtle shifts in posture and voice. And he shared fantastic romantic spark with Margot Kidder, who played the reporter Lois Lane. Now, what's interesting about Lois Lane, as she's depicted in this movie, is that she's actually not necessarily the greatest reporter. She makes spelling mistakes all the time, like she doesn't know how to spell basic words, and it humanizes the character, but it also, it puts you into this weird spot where you're like, okay, this is not the most professional newspaper that that you could possibly think of here. And Lois Lane is sort of like an every woman character, I suppose. And the fact that she's put in this crazy situation, I think just elevates the role a little bit. And the film also featured massive star power, anchoring its comic roots with Marlon Brando as Superman's Kryptonian father named Jor-El, and you have Gene Hackman, who brought a memorable egotistical charisma to the villainous mastermind Lex Luthor. And this also had John Williams' Unforgettable March, and the film was a massive $300 million success that laid the blueprint for the entire modern superhero genre in a lot of key ways. So, not too bad for an alien. And, Gene Hackman's sidekick is also great in this movie. And there's there's some funny moments there. just go ahead and check this movie out. It still holds up pretty well today, although you know it has some moments that you're gonna be like, what? Like like the way the movie ends, for example. I don't want to spoil it too much, but it gets mixed reviews for that ending. So you have to suspend some disbelief in order to appreciate this movie, as you do with the Superman character overall and the superhero genre. But here's one way I'll put it. I'm not a huge Superman fan. One of my critiques of Superman is that he's just too powerful. He doesn't have enough vulnerabilities. He has too many different powers. He's kind of like, I don't know. You need somebody to have a few more weaknesses in order to root for them, to sort of regard them as if they are in some ways relatable. And Superman is not necessarily that relatable of a character, but I still enjoy this movie despite all that. So that might be a sign that this is actually a pretty well done movie. If even somebody who's not the biggest fan of the character still likes the movie, there's something to be said about that, I think. So yeah, moving on to selection number 4. It's getting into some horror territory now because we're talking about Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978. And this is a movie that I've watched twice recently. I watched it with my mom, and I don't know if my brother was there. I don't remember who all was in the room. But anyway, what an interesting movie this one is. It's Philip Kaufman's 1978 remake that took Jack Finney's novel and updated it for a cynical post Watergate era. And in the next episode, I'm planning to review the original. Well, the next one of these alien themed episodes. So I'm not trying to completely disrespect the original. It's just I wanted to hop into this one first because, well, this is sort of the modern one that kind of helped relaunch alien horror and the paranoid body horror kind of genre. This was one of the ones that got into that, and of course aliens are freaky as a premise here. There's the whole thing of having people being replaced by these things that are not quite human and how freaky that would be. And the story follows a San Francisco health inspector who realizes alien pods are replacing humans with exact duplicates who possess every memory but they lack all human emotion. Or at least for the most part. I guess there are a few moments where you can kind of see something that hints at human emotion or something like that. I guess they can simulate it a little bit at times. You tell me. You tell me. Maybe it's like a mistake in the movie that happens at times, but they're not completely, totally 1000% devoid of detectable emotion. And the film relies heavily on its exceptional ensemble cast to ground the surreal nightmare scenario. You have Donald Sutherland. He is the he is the desperate emotional anchor. He plays Matthew Bennell, and he's paired with Brooke Adams as his terrified coworker, Elizabeth Driscoll. That they work for the health department, and they're joined by a phenomenal supporting cast, including Jeff Goldblum and Veronica Cartwright, who's going to make an appearance in the next film that I talk about as well. And Goldblum and Cartwright, they play this eccentric, panicked couple. And you have Leonard Nimoy, who uses his trademark detached demeanor perfectly as a popular pop psychologist trying to rationalize away the spreading panic. And I gotta say, he was probably one of the best casting choices here because the character of Spock, obviously already known for the lack of emotion, and you really couldn't have found a better actor to plays somebody who lacks emotion. And, that almost sounds like an insult, but it's actually kind of a compliment, because that's what this role required, and man, does he ever deliver. And the film excels at psychological horror, building a slow burning tension that culminates in one of the bleakest, most legendary endings in horror history. So, some of you have probably already seen it because it has become a meme, and it's a great meme as well. And it kind of could be employed in a lot of different situations, such as the political phenomenon of cults, where you see somebody that you know and you no longer recognize them because they're like a different person because their worldview has completely shifted and they just are kind of freaky now. And that meme could be employed in that sort of scenario. It's a real thing where some people, they get wrapped up in something that just like swallows them whole, and it changes them as a person, kind of spits them out empty. It's a freaky phenomenon, and that's what this movie kind of reminds me of a little bit. It's not necessarily just literal, like you could see it as a metaphorical thing about people sort of losing their souls, if you will, or their minds, and just becoming like these programmed machines or whatever. And you know that itself could become like a conspiracy theory thing. So this movie might be able to spread conspiracy theories. It might be able to inspire that. So it is a potentially dangerous movie, actually. Um, and of course, the aliens themselves, they're a freaky idea. I think most of the effects are done pretty well in this movie. I certainly couldn't have done a better job myself. I'm sure that there are some critiques a person could make of this film. There might be some plot holes here and there, but I can't really think of any. Maybe I'm just stupid. I don't know. But I just think this is a good movie. Well, possibly a great movie even, and it's worth rewatching every so often. I happen to rewatch it twice lately, so yeah, it's something. Check it out. And okay, for the final entry, in case you didn't guess, and that'd be weird if you couldn't guess because it's the main image for the episode, but we're talking about Alien from 1979. So all of these movies were released before I was even born, so we're going a little bit old school with this one. Not quite getting into 1950s sci-fi alien stuff, but we're in the 60s and 70s, almost into the 80s now. And in 1979, you had Ridley Scott's masterclass in sci-fi horror. The crew of the commercial towing vessel Nostromo, they respond to a mandatory corporate distress signal only to bring a terrifyingly adaptive extraterrestrial life form on board their ship. And rather than casting typical action stars, Ridley Scott assembled a brilliant ensemble of these character actors to make the crew feel like relatable, exhausted blue collar workers. And that's one of my favorite things about this movie. They seem like real people in a way. Sigourney Weaver delivered a star-making, fiercely practical performance as Warrant Officer Ellen Ripley. She was backed by Tom Skerritt as the weary Captain Dallas, John Hurt as the ill-fated Kane, Ian Holm as the quietly clinical science officer named Ash, and yes, Veronica Cartwright as the increasingly terrified Lambert. And Harry Dean Stanton and Yaphet Kotto provided incredible realism as the disgruntled engineers down in the stars, or I was going to say the starship, in the ship's underbelly. I was thinking about Jefferson Starship, maybe. But anyway, I relate to these characters. I think a lot of us would relate to them because they just seem like they're regular people, and you can hear them complaining about their pay. They're not getting paid enough, and especially Yaphet Kotto's character. And you also have Bolaji Badejo, who plays the alien. That's right. The alien, memorable as hell, designed by H.R. Giger. There's the biomechanical monster design, which brought raw body horror to the screen. And of course, there's the infamous chest burster scene. Check it out.